The dinner party was her idea. 12 guests, one long polished table, handmade place cards in gold calligraphy, and a playlist carefully curated to make her look effortless. It was all her, Evelyn. My wife of 8 years, 8 long years of curated appearances and covert corrections. The wine flowed. Laughter rose like steam from the plates. I stayed quiet, as always, the dependable one. The man who brought the right wine and didn't speak out of turn. That was my role, her silent partner, her +1 with a law degree. She waited until dessert. That's when she did it. "Caleb," Evelyn said, placing her fork down like she was announcing the results of a charity auction. "Why don't you take the guest room tonight?" The table went silent. The air froze mid-laugh. I looked up. "Sorry?" She tilted her head with that perfectly trained smirk. "You've been snoring again?" "Loudly. It's just distracting." A few forced chuckles fluttered around the table. Our friends, or hers, more accurately, didn't know whether to laugh or look away. My heart didn't drop. It slowed. She didn't mean snoring. She meant, "You're no longer welcome in my bed." She meant, "Let me humiliate you gently, publicly, so I look graceful when this ends." She meant, "This is step 1 of whatever she thought she'd already won." I dabbed my lips with my napkin. Calm, measured. "Of course," I said, smiling at our guests. "I wouldn't want to disturb anyone's peace." I saw it then, just the slightest twitch in her jaw. Surprise. She expected hurt, embarrassment, pushback. She didn't expect poise. But then again, Evelyn had always mistaken quiet for weakness. That night I packed a small bag and moved into the guest room like an obedient dog. I didn't slam the door, didn't say a word. But while she sipped chamomile in the master suite, still basking in her little performance, I reached under the guest bed and pulled out the fireproof box I'd hidden there 6 months ago. Inside, a hard drive, copies of every real estate document she'd ever signed, screenshots of her private, financial accounts, and the signed agreement she didn't remember initialing on her birthday. The one that quietly gave me power of attorney over the marital trust. I clicked on the file marked Final Phase and began the upload. Let me rewind. She started cheating in March. I knew by April. The gym schedule changed. The phone always face down. The scent of someone else's cologne on her scarf. And once, the sound of laughter through the wall, a kind she never shared with me anymore. I didn't confront her. I documented. I prepared. I remembered what my father once told me after my mother left him for her yoga instructor. A man with a temper leaves smoke. A man with a strategy leaves nothing but silence and a signature. Evelyn thought the house was hers. It was in her name, yes. A wedding gift from her father's firm, a gesture of financial control more than love. But the trust that paid the property taxes? Mine. Quietly converted 6 months ago to a separate LLC I established in Delaware. All legal, all clean, all irreversible. And thanks to her trust in paperwork she didn't have time to read, she'd signed over more than she realized. She made it easy. The next morning she brewed coffee like nothing happened. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. I smiled. Like a man with no obligations. She didn't catch it. The call came at 10:14 a.m. Her voice traveled down the hallway, sharp and clipped. "What do you mean it's sold? Without my permission? That's impossible." A beat of silence. Then, No, that can't be right. I own that house." I walked into the kitchen just as she ended the call. She turned to me, pale. "The house," she said slowly. "It's gone." I sipped my coffee. "Escrow closed at midnight. Didn't you check your email?" "You can't do that," she hissed. "It's under my name." I set the mug down gently. It was. But the funding? The trust? The transfer you signed 6 months ago after your third glass of wine? That makes me the sole legal executor of the holding company. You tricked me. No, I said. I gave you all the documents. You just didn't care to read them. Remember what you said that night? Just sign it, Caleb. I'm tired. She took a step back, eyes wide. You planned this. I tilted my head. I warned you. Quiet men don't mean weak. We mean precise. That's when it clicked for her, all of it. The snoring, the guest room, the staged dinner party. She thought she was drawing first blood. She didn't realize she was stepping into the trap. A house is more than walls. It's leverage, and now it was mine, until I sold it out from under her name. Legally, elegantly, finally. She told me to sleep in the guest room, not knowing I already owned the walls. The first real clue came on a Sunday. She was in the shower. I was walking past her home office carrying coffee to my desk. Her laptop was open. Evelyn never left her laptop open. It wasn't locked. The screen glowed with an email. The subject line read, "About last night." And below that, "I still can't believe we almost got caught." The body of the message was short, too short. The kind that says more by what it doesn't say. You make her feel small so well, don't slip, she's not stupid, can't wait for Friday. Same place? No name, no signature, just a lowercase ki. I stood there, coffee going cold. I didn't feel rage, not yet. I felt confirmation. Because I'd felt it coming for months. The shift in her posture when I entered a room, the double takes at her phone, the too frequent work dinners. That ended at midnight and smelled like perfume that wasn't hers. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't need to. I just went to my desk and wrote down everything I remembered from the screen. Then I opened a clean folder on my hard drive and labeled it, Exit Strategy, Phase 1. Later that night, we made dinner together. She talked about Saffron like it mattered. She told me her boss was finally retiring and that the firm wanted her to take over operations. I'll have more hours, though, she said. Longer nights. I nodded. Of course, that makes sense. She smiled. She always smiled when she lied. It wasn't even a good one. It was mechanical, the kind that says, I'm already somewhere else. I just haven't packed yet. I spent the next month listening more than I spoke. She grew bolder. Unlocked phone on the kitchen counter. Calendar events marked workout at 9 p.m. Receipts from places we'd never been together. Every betrayal was disguised as routine, which made it easier to track. She once left her planner open. She didn't see me see it. Inside, a business card tucked into the cover sleeve. Kellen Price, Realtor. I remembered the K from the email. I flipped the card over. On the back, in sharp, angular handwriting, tell him soon, or I will. That night, while she was asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of our marriage that now felt scripted. The way she corrected my tie before dinners. The way she called me dependable to friends, like I was a Labrador, not a man. The way she clutched the deed to the house like it made her bulletproof. That was the night I started looking at property law in her state. I found the loophole in the third article of our marital trust. It took 6 weeks. I filed a quiet motion to restructure the funding funnel through a shell company, one she'd technically signed over during a birthday estate revision. She didn't read the documents. She just said, "You always handle this boring stuff." So I did, and I recorded every moment. I became someone else in those months, still polite, still warm, still helpful. But my eyes were open, and my ears were tuned for inconsistencies. Evelyn thought she was peeling away from me with grace, like a dancer sliding off stage before the curtain falls, but I was already in the wings pulling the wires. 2 months later, she accidentally sent me a photo meant for someone else. It was her in a dress I hadn't seen, lips red, shoulder bare. The message under it, "I still smell like you. Hope you don't mind." Then, "Oh my God, Wrong person. Sorry, that was meant for L. I texted back. No worries, happens. She didn't mention it again, and I didn't need her to. That was the moment I knew for sure. She wanted me to break first. She wanted me to leave, to give her the narrative. Instead, I took her asset. She thought cheating gave her leverage. I thought leverage made for excellent real estate. That week I called my own realtor, someone she didn't know. We drafted a quiet listing under my holding name. The title was technically still in hers, but the ownership of the funding, that was already mine. And in this market, a buyer didn't care whose name was on the sign, as long as the seller had the keys. 3 nights before the dinner party, I sat across from Evelyn and asked, "Do you think this house ever really felt like home?" She looked up from her wine. "Home's just a word, Caleb. What matters is control." I nodded, smiling. "And you've always had that?" She shrugged. "Didn't I?" I raised my glass to her. "Cheers, Evelyn. May your confidence never read the fine print." The first time I saw Kellen in person, he was standing in my driveway. Tall, too clean. Navy blazer with a white pocket square, the kind of man who kept breath mints in a silver case and called it branding. I watched from the upstairs window as Evelyn hugged him like a client. The hug lingered a second too long. He didn't carry a clipboard or a briefcase, just charm and arrogance. She was showing him the garden, the back patio, the pool. She was pitching my house like she'd already sold her soul to him with the square footage. I stayed upstairs. I let her think I hadn't noticed. Let them pretend they weren't exactly what they were. Let them walk the grounds of their fantasy. Because fantasies collapse fast when you shake the ground they're built on. That night she came home humming. She poured herself a glass of white wine and leaned in the doorway of my study. "Kellen thinks we should get the deck refinished." I kept my eyes on the screen. "Oh?" "He says it could raise the value by 20%. I turned to her, finally. "Are you planning to sell?" She paused, then smiled, soft, rehearsed. "It's just an idea. I want to be smart about things. Keep options open." "I see." She walked away before I could say more. But I didn't need to say more. I had everything I needed, including the receipt from the private investigator I'd hired 2 weeks ago, now confirming Kellen's full name, his license number, and the quiet little lawsuit his old brokerage had sealed last year. Fraud, misrepresentation, violation of fiduciary duty, settled privately, but not invisible, not if you know where to look. And I did. Quote-worthy line. She brought a man with a stained suit into a house built on clean contracts. I met Kellen myself a week later. He didn't know it was me, not at first. I booked a consult under the name Mark W. Neutral House, Neutral District. He arrived on time, smelling like ambition. "Mr. Walters?" he asked. "That's me," I said, extending my hand. "Thanks for coming out." He smiled wide, confident. He didn't recognize me from the photo in Evelyn's office, didn't make the connection, just another Mark to him. I let him walk through the fake house, a rental from a friend, let him do his pitch. Then I interrupted him in the kitchen. "Do you ever Google your clients?" He blinked. "Sometimes." "You should have Googled me," I said. I pulled out a printed copy of the sealed court filing from 2020, the fraud case. He paled. "I don't know what—" I stepped closer. "Relax, I'm not a cop. I'm just a man who doesn't like being taken for a fool." His voice dropped. "Who are you?" "Caleb Warwick." He stepped back, eyes wide. "Oh. Yeah. Oh." He tried to spin, said Evelyn had told him I was emotionally checked out, that I refused therapy, that she wasn't looking to hurt me. I let him talk, then handed him another file. This one, a summary of the deed transfer and the power of attorney Evelyn had unknowingly signed. "You want to be part of her exit strategy? Be my guest," I said. "Just understand what the house she promised you." I leaned in. It's already gone, sold, closed, transferred, and when she finds out, guess whose name was used as the selling agent? His eyes darted to the file again. I let the silence stretch, then said, "You're wearing shoes you can't afford to get dirty. I'd walk away while your reputation still has legs." He left without another word. I never saw him again, but Evelyn did. 2 days later, she found the letter he'd left on her car seat. I never read it, but she came inside fuming. She slammed drawers, poured whiskey instead of wine, then stood in the kitchen, hands shaking. "He left," she said flatly. "Who?" She didn't answer. "Something wrong with the deck plans?" I asked, sipping tea. She stared at me, eyes narrow. And in that moment, I could see her doing the math, adding up my calm, my silence, my lack of questions, subtracting her options. She didn't speak again that night, and I didn't need her to. The sale finalized the next morning, documents signed, keys handed off. The new owners were a young couple expecting twins. They called it their dream home. They didn't know what ghosts I'd swept out of its corners. I didn't care if Evelyn stayed for a few days. I'd already given them written notice. I let her have the illusion of space. Because when you control the foundation, you don't have to slam doors, you just lock them quietly. 3 days after the sale closed, Evelyn tried to move the furniture. She came home from a luncheon, in heels too high for walking, a stress line between her brows. I was sitting in the guest room, reading a book I'd pretended to put down for the last 6 months, one about stillness, strangely enough. She appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. "Did you authorize a moving company?" I looked up slowly. "No." "Well, someone canceled my delivery. They said the house is in transition." I bookmarked my page. Calm. "It is." She stared at me. "Transition?" she repeated. "Yes, into someone else's name." Her hands curled at her sides. "You can't sell what isn't yours." I stood and walked to the window. From there, we could see the edge of the garden where the new couple had already scheduled landscaping work. "Funny thing about that," I said. "You owned the title, I owned the funding, and the funding owned the trust owned the LLC, and the LLC owned the house." She stepped forward. "You manipulated the paperwork." "No," I said, turning to her. "I just read it." That night she made calls, lots of them, lawyers, her firm's estate planner, a real estate contact in the city who owed her favors. She slammed the door to the office, then emerged hours later, pale. "They said there's nothing I can do." I nodded. "That's true." Her voice cracked. "Caleb, you blindsided me." "No," I said. "You just stopped looking." By the next morning, she had switched tactics, softened. She made coffee, brought me a cup, sat beside me on the porch like it was 3 years ago again, before all the cracks formed. "I think we rushed things," she said. "I agree. I never wanted to hurt you." "I believe that." She smiled, testing the air. "I still care about you, you know." I sipped the coffee. Perfect brew, exactly how I liked it. A small detail meant to earn trust again. "Of course," I said. "And I care about due process," she blinked. "What?" "I mean," I said, lowering the mug, "now that the house is sold, I suppose you'll want to make things official." "Official?" "The divorce." The smile vanished. That was when it hit her. I hadn't just taken the house. I was taking everything that came with it. Later that week, she tried to contact the buyers directly, left voicemails, showed up uninvited. They called me confused, a little spooked. "Is she all right?" the woman asked me over the phone. I reassured her. "She's just grieving control," I said. "It's a hard thing to bury." I didn't gloat, didn't boast. That's the mistake too many people make in revenge. They spike the ball too early, celebrate too loudly. Me? I let the silence ring. because silence, when earned, echoes louder than victory laps. The next betrayal wasn't hers. It was mine, to her pride. She opened a letter 2 weeks later. It was a financial audit of the shared accounts, of the hidden credit cards, of the assets she thought she'd buried in private folders under fake business names. I'd filed a formal motion for financial disclosure ahead of the divorce filing, required by law. But she never expected me to know where to dig. She stormed into the living room, waving the papers. "Are you spying on me now?" "No," I said. "I'm just not pretending anymore." She threw the papers on the floor. "You really think you can paint me as the villain?" I looked at her, mascara smudged, blazer wrinkled from a day spent chasing lost ground. "I don't need to paint you as anything, Evelyn," I said. "You've done a beautiful job outlining your character in bold, permanent strokes." She didn't fall from grace. She slipped off a pedestal she built too narrow for anyone else to stand on. I filed the divorce papers that Friday, served through her office, in a discreet envelope marked confidential. She was in a meeting with her partners when it was delivered. 10 minutes later, I received a single text. "I hope this makes you feel powerful." I didn't reply, because power wasn't the point. Peace was. And peace is rarely loud. That weekend, I moved into a small house by the lake. Not flashy, not expensive, but mine. The deed bore only one name, and this time, I read every word, twice. Evelyn didn't attend the final settlement meeting in person. She sent her lawyer. He didn't say much, just slid over the documents and nodded. When it was done, I stood. He looked at me and said, "She didn't see this coming." I nodded. That was the mistake. Then I left. The new house was quiet, not silent, peaceful. There's a difference. Birds in the morning. Water tapping the edge of the dock like it was saying hello. The kind of quiet that didn't demand I explain myself. For the first time in almost a decade, I didn't walk on eggshells. I walked barefoot. I kept my phone off for an entire weekend. Sat on the porch with a paperback and a black coffee. No curated dinners, no social strategy. No Evelyn watching me for signs of rebellion she could twist into guilt. Just the lake, the breeze, and my own company. And it hit me. I had no idea who I was outside of her shadow. I unpacked slowly, box by box. Inside one was a forgotten notebook, worn leather cover, lined pages filled with ideas I'd jotted down years ago, designs, legal theories. A list titled, "Things I'll Do When I Don't Have to Be Careful Anymore." At the top of that list, "Build something no one can take from me." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I picked up a pen and started again. The irony? She always called me small, not in front of others. Evelyn was too refined for that, but in the quiet. "You think too narrowly. You're risk-averse. Can't you just be bold for once?" What she meant was, "Why can't you be more like me?" But boldness without boundaries isn't courage, it's recklessness. And now, I wasn't playing her game anymore. I was building mine. I started laying the groundwork for something bigger. Not revenge, not rescue, a restoration, an independent practice, something I'd dreamed of since law school. Small, precise, intentional. I registered the business in my name only. No silent partners, no messy mergers. I called it Warwick and Quiet. The name made me smile, because I wasn't loud, but I was thorough. Evelyn, meanwhile, didn't go quietly. She tried to control the fallout. I heard from a mutual friend she was rewriting the story. "She says you sold the house to hurt her," they told me. "She's playing the abandoned victim card." I didn't defend myself. I didn't correct the story, because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs time. And time has a funny way of showing its loyalty to the quiet ones. 2 weeks after the divorce finalized, she sent me a single email. Subject, "For what it's worth, Caleb." You were right to leave. I was unkind. Maybe cruel. I don't know what I expected from you. Silence, maybe. But I didn't expect strategy. You didn't just leave. You outmaneuvered me. For what it's worth, I see that now. I read it once, didn't reply, then archived it. Some apologies are seeds tossed on concrete, no soil, no chance to grow, just the rustle of guilt in the wind. One night, I sat by the lake with a glass of scotch and asked myself the question I'd avoided for months. Why did I stay that long? The answer wasn't romantic. It wasn't about hope. It was about erosion. Evelyn didn't destroy me in one blow. She chipped away at me politely, corrected my tone, dismissed my instincts, sighed when I disagreed, laughed just a little too long at my expense. She didn't need to control my choices. She just made me question if they mattered. That's the thing about manipulative people. They don't break you. They convince you you're already broken. She didn't ruin me with rage. She wore me down with refinements. That realization didn't make me bitter. It made me whole, because now I knew. The scars weren't shameful. They were proof of endurance, proof that I could survive elegant sabotage and still walk away without bowing my head. The next day, I printed out a single photo, not of her, of me. The last photo I took before the house sold, standing on the back deck, wind in my hair, no ring on my finger. I framed it, hung it in the office of Warwick and Quiet. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. I am not what she left behind. I am what I rebuilt after she left. The news came on a Thursday. I was sitting in my new office, a fresh cup of black coffee on my desk, when my phone buzzed. A text from Camilla, one of the few mutual friends who had stayed neutral through the divorce. Did you see the board memo? Evelyn stepping down. Effective immediately. I didn't respond at first. I just leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Not surprised, not smug, just still, like a man who knew exactly which domino would fall next. The firm Evelyn worked for was all about appearances. Sleek brand, clean numbers, controlled narratives. She'd built her reputation there, not just as a fixer, but a precision professional, the one who cleaned up messes and closed deals with a smile. But image is fragile, and reputations, like houses, collapse quietly, at first. 2 weeks earlier, she'd tried to leverage a new client for the firm, a property group expanding into our city. She'd pitched herself as connected, resourceful, able to navigate real estate with speed and discretion. They ran a background check, found nothing illegal, but they found something worse, a sudden house transfer, an internal trustee override, a former spouse with a law firm, and no scandal attached to his name. The client passed. Word spread. And in that world, reputation is currency. Camilla called me that evening. I know you didn't do it to ruin her, she said. I didn't, I replied. But you knew it would happen. I sipped my drink. I just stopped shielding her from consequences. Sometimes revenge isn't striking back. It's stepping aside and letting gravity do the rest. That weekend, Evelyn emailed me again. Subject, unraveled. You win. I never thought you had this in you. You were always so careful, so reserved. I guess I mistook silence for softness. Do you feel better now? This time I did respond. Briefly. Subject, no, I don't feel better. I feel free. That's not the same thing. Caleb. In the weeks that followed, I heard more whispers. Evelyn's name was no longer floated for the partner track. 2 junior associates transferred out from under her management, and someone on the board, her biggest backer, had quietly removed her name from their succession plan. She'd become what she always feared, replaceable. Meanwhile, Warwick and Quiet was thriving. Not fast, not flashy, but solid. Clean cases, private clients, word-of-mouth referrals from people who valued discretion over dominance. I hired 2 part-time associates, started mentoring a local law student, built something built to last. Every time I walked into that space, I felt taller, not because I was better than her, because I was finally mine. One afternoon, a real estate firm reached out, the same one Evelyn had tried to impress. They asked if I'd consult for a zoning issue. I accepted. At the end of the meeting, the director leaned in and said, "Funny how things work out, huh?" I smiled. "I don't believe in funny," I said. "I believe in foundations. The quiet kind." Evelyn tried to rebuild, of course. People like her always do. New job applications, a LinkedIn rebrand, a few reflective posts about lessons and leadership. But the thing about poetic irony, it doesn't strike loud. It erodes you from the inside out, and she was already cracked. She sent one more message, a final attempt at narrative control. Subject: "We both made mistakes. I won't pretend I didn't hurt you. But let's not pretend this wasn't mutual. We drifted. People change. It wasn't all bad, was it?" I didn't reply. Because closure isn't something you give someone who weaponized your loyalty. It's something you take back. Quietly. Like a deed in the middle of the night. Later that month, I stood on the deck of my lake house. No longer a guest. No longer a prisoner of someone else's version of me. The sun dipped behind the trees. And I thought, she told me to sleep in the guest room, thinking she was moving me out of the way. She didn't realize I was already building the exit. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, overcast. I was reviewing a case brief when the door to my office opened without a knock. I looked up, already reaching for a polite apology. Then I froze. Standing there, trench coat, coffee in hand, same tired eyes from 6 years ago, was Asha, my sister. We hadn't spoken since the wedding, not because of a fight, because of Evelyn. Asha had called her curated, said she was trying too hard to be liked and not hard enough to be real. Evelyn called her jealous, said I needed people around me who elevated, not challenged. I didn't push back. I let the distance grow, and by the time I looked up, Asha was gone. Now she stood in my doorway like time had been paused and just pressed play again. "You gonna offer me a seat or just stare?" I smiled, stunned. "You still drink your coffee black?" "Like your humor," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward, looking around the office. "Warwick and quiet, huh?" I nodded. "It fits." "You look better," she said. "Better than what?" "Than the version of you who used to text me back in one-word answers." I paused. I deserved that. She softened. "Yeah, but I came anyway." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Legal documents. Custody case. Her friends, not hers. She needed advice. Trustworthy advice. "And I figured," she said, "if anyone knows what it's like to lose something quietly, it's you." That hit harder than she meant it to, or maybe exactly as hard as she meant it to. We worked through the case. I asked questions. She answered honestly. No posturing, no positioning, just realness, something I hadn't felt in years. When we finished, she closed the file, looked at me and said, "So, how's Evelyn?" I almost laughed. "She's in a different chapter now." "And you?" "Learning to read my own story again." She smiled at that. "About time," she said. Later, over lunch, she asked the question I'd been bracing for. "Why did you let her pull you so far from everyone?" I didn't flinch. Because she didn't push, not at first, she just rearranged the furniture. "What?" "You ever walk into a room and feel like something's off but you can't name it?" She nodded. "That was our marriage. Little things moved." My voice got smaller. My world got narrower. And before I knew it, the only person I could hear was her. Asha stirred her drink. "And when did you wake up?" "When she told me to sleep in the guest room." Her eyebrows lifted. I shrugged. It wasn't what she said. It was how easy it was for her to say it. Like I was an appliance she could unplug when I got noisy. She didn't change overnight. She changed the weather, so slowly I didn't notice I was always cold. Asha reached across the table and touched my hand. You came back. I'm trying. No, she said. You did. That night I sat on the porch and thought about all the people I'd let fade from my life. Not because they stopped caring, because I stopped believing I deserved their care. That's what control does. It isolates you in plain sight. It tells you you're safest when you're small. But Asha reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. That love doesn't require explanation. Only presence. The next morning I called my mother. She cried. I didn't say much, just that I missed her. She didn't ask why it took so long. She just said, we kept a seat for you. People think revenge is the end. But it's not. Revenge is the release. The end is what you build after. And now, I wasn't just rebuilding walls. I was restoring bridges. The envelope was thin, white, unassuming. No return address. Just my name, handwritten, in a script I didn't recognize. It arrived on a Monday morning, dropped through the mail slot like a ghost with bad timing. I almost tossed it. But something about the handwriting made me pause. It wasn't Evelyn's. But it was familiar. Inside, a single sheet of legal stationery folded once. At the top, pre-authorization, durable POA, executor amendment request. I read it 3 times, once fast, once slow, then again aloud. It was a form I didn't recall signing, but my name was on it. So was hers, and at the bottom, a stamped approval from a notary. I called Miriam, my firm's paralegal. I need you to pull anything with my signature from July 14th of last year, I said. She didn't ask why. 30 minutes later, she sent the file. There it was, buried between estate forms and insurance paperwork, a pre-authorization granting Evelyn limited executor access to my estate, contingent on divorce proceedings. It looked authentic. Except for one thing. I never signed it. I stared at the signature. It was mine, almost. But the W in Warwick had a curve I didn't use, and the loop on the C was too wide. Close enough to pass under casual scrutiny, not close enough for me to miss. I sat back in my chair, cold, still. Evelyn had forged my name, not for a major asset, that would have been traceable, but for access, leverage, the ability to act as if she still had control, in my name, if things turned against her. She'd filed it 3 weeks before the dinner party, which meant she was planning to scorch the earth if she lost the house. I didn't panic. I printed everything, marked every discrepancy, attached a notarized affidavit stating I had no knowledge of the filing, then walked it down the hall to my own associate. This goes on record, I said, quietly, for now. She nodded, reading the highlighted lines. Think she used it? I paused. I think she meant to. Later that night, I sat in the dark and thought about her. Not the woman in the cocktail dress and cruel words, the other Evelyn, the one I married, the one I used to believe saw me as a partner, not a pawn. I tried to remember when that version of her disappeared. But the truth is, maybe she never did. Maybe she just hid her games in open air, dressed as ambition, painted with charm, masked by grace. And I was too loyal to question her plays. I called Asha the next morning, told her what I found. She didn't flinch. She always played long, she said. But you're not playing anymore. No, I said. I'm documenting. She forged my name on paper, but I'd already erased hers from my future. I filed a formal fraud notice with the licensing board that week. Not to ruin her, just to protect my name. I didn't go public, didn't throw fire. I let the process unfold. Quiet, clean, correct, by the book. Because revenge disguised as accountability can be dismissed. But accountability disguised as process? That stays. 3 days later, her lawyer emailed my firm. No apology, Just 3 clipped lines. We have no knowledge of this filing. If necessary, we will cooperate with the investigation. Please confirm any additional concerns. I wrote back personally, no concerns. Only truth. And truth, unlike marriage, doesn't require agreement. I didn't expect her to confess. I didn't need her to, because she knew. And now, so did everyone else who mattered. The fallout was slow, private. Not as dramatic as the house, but deeper. One of her firm's partners stepped down from her advisory board. 2 clients quietly shifted their legal matters elsewhere, and her reputation, already cracking, now had legal uncertainty tied to her name. That's the thing about lies. You can bury them for a while, but if you sign someone else's name, eventually the real version walks into the room. I stood in my office that Friday and looked at the clean wall where my name hung. Warwick and quiet, unforged, unshaken, and finally, fully mine. The cafe was the same brick walls, same flickering pendant lights, same scratched table by the window where I used to grade law school papers. I hadn't been back in almost 10 years. I didn't even mean to stop there. But I'd taken a different route home from the courthouse that day, slower, less calculated, and suddenly, I was pulling into the parking lot like my body remembered something my mind had buried. I walked in expecting nothing. And then she looked up. Hair shorter now, gold hoop earrings. A book in one hand, cappuccino in the other. Mira. We dated for a semester back in law school. Ended on good terms. No drama, no betrayal, just life, calling us in different directions. She went into education policy. I chased courtroom strategy. We hadn't spoken in 7 years. And yet, there she was. Same smile, warm, real, not curated for show. She recognized me instantly. Caleb Warwick, she said, standing. Mira Patel, I replied. Still reading in cafes? She smiled. Still pretending not to read people in cafes? We sat, talked, caught up like time hadn't turned into distance. She asked about the firm. I gave her the condensed version. When I mentioned Evelyn, past tense, deliberately, her eyes didn't flinch. She just said, I always wondered if she made room for you. I raised an eyebrow. Room? For your voice, your thoughts. You were always quieter than the room you walked into. I paused, stirring my coffee. No, she didn't. But I stopped needing permission. Mira nodded. Good. The world needs more quiet men who learn how to speak without being loud. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the divorce. Not about betrayal. About everything else. Books, cities, regret, second chances. It wasn't romantic. It was human. Before she left, she scribbled something on a napkin. Old-fashioned, I know, she said. But I figure if you kept your soul intact through all that, maybe we could talk again. I took it. Watched her walk away with the same grace she always had, unforced, unbothered. And something inside me stirred. Not longing, not guilt, just permission. To imagine something new. That night I stood on my porch and reread the number. I didn't text her, not yet. I just looked at it and thought, what if peace isn't just silence? What if peace is someone asking, how are you, and actually meaning it? I opened my notebook and wrote 1 sentence. I no longer flinch when kindness shows up. Later that week, Asha dropped by. She saw the napkin on my counter, lifted an eyebrow. What's this? Possibility, she smirked. You're healing. I nodded. Not quickly, not loudly, but completely. She left me for dead, and still I bloomed. I didn't call Mira that week, or the next. I let the thought of her settle into my new life like a song I wasn't ready to sing yet. Because healing isn't a performance, it's a return. And for the first time, I was returning to myself. She showed up at my office unannounced. No appointment, no call, no email. Just walked in like it was still her right to take up space I'd reclaimed. My receptionist looked panicked when she knocked on my door. "Mr. Warwick," she whispered, "there's a woman here. She says you know her." I didn't flinch. I already knew who it was. I stood and opened the door. There she was. Evelyn, neutral-toned blazer, simple gold chain, that same too-still smile. "Caleb," she said. "Evelyn." She glanced at my office sign, Warwick and quiet, then looked back at me. Clever. I didn't answer. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking stock of the room like she was cataloging regret. I let the silence stretch. She always hated that, when I didn't rush to fill the air for her comfort. She broke first. "I'm not here to fight." "Good," I said, "because there's nothing left to win." She sat, crossed one leg over the other. Classic Evelyn power pose. "I wanted to clarify something." I raised an eyebrow. She continued. "The document? The one with your forged signature?" My jaw tightened, but I stayed still. "You already reported it," she said. "I know." "You came to apologize?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I came to ask you not to pursue it further." There it was, the ask, wrapped in humility, packaged like a peace offering. But underneath, pressure. Because if I dropped the complaint, her name stayed clear. If I didn't, it stayed questioned. "I didn't use it," she said softly. "I was angry. I felt like I had no control." "And you thought forging my name would fix that?" Her gaze faltered for a second. Then she straightened. "I made a mistake. One I regret." I leaned forward. "You regret getting caught." "Not what you did." She sighed. "I'm not the villain you think I am, Caleb." "No," I said. "You're worse." Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "Villains know what they're doing. You lied to yourself while you lied to everyone else." She blinked. I stood. "We're done here." She stayed seated. "I didn't come just for the document," she said. I turned back. "I came because I heard you're seeing someone." Now that surprised me. "Who told you that?" She shrugged. "People talk. Mutuals. You know how it is." I didn't answer. "I just thought it was fast," she said carefully. "Given everything." I tilted my head. "You kicked me out of the bed before I left the house, Evelyn. You started fast." A pause. "I never wanted it to end like this," she said. "And yet," I replied, "you handed me the scissors." She walked into my office asking for forgiveness. But what she really wanted was to rewrite the ending. She finally stood, straightened her blazer, looked around my office one more time. "You really rebuilt everything?" "No," I said. "I built it right this time." She opened her mouth, then closed it, and walked to the door. Hand on the handle, she paused. "Do you ever think about how it might have been different?" I stepped behind my desk. "Every day, and I'm grateful it wasn't." She left. I didn't watch her go. I just sat, breathing, centered, unshaken. Because she didn't come for closure, she came for control, and she left with neither. Later that night, I texted Mira, not a long message. Just, "That coffee's still on the table if you are." She replied a minute later, "I don't flinch from ghosts, I just ask if they've learned." The coffee with Mira wasn't a date. At least that's what we told ourselves. It was two people meeting after years apart, both carrying quiet bruises in places no one could see. But there was something different in the air that evening. Not tension, not sparks, recognition. Of what we'd each survived, of who we had become, and maybe most of all of who we were finally ready to be. She showed up in a gray sweater and worn boots, hair down, no makeup, no performance. She looked like someone who didn't need to be impressive to feel present. I admired that more than I could say. "Still black coffee?" I asked. "Still," she said. "And you still drink it like it's a shield." I smiled. "Less these days." We sat on the patio of a place I'd passed 100 times, but never entered. The kind of place Evelyn wouldn't have liked. Too plain, too honest, too uncontrolled, and maybe that's why it felt perfect. The conversation didn't try to impress. She asked about the firm. I told her how it was built on referrals, not billboards. She asked about my house. I told her I'd finally learned what space felt like when no one was taking notes on how I used it. She listened like every sentence mattered. Not to debate, to understand. And I realized it had been years since I'd felt safe being unpolished. "I think I forgot how to trust people," I said. She nodded. "That's okay. Trust isn't a door. It's a hallway. And what happens if you get stuck in the middle? You sit," she said, "and wait for your legs to come back." That line stayed with me. All night, even after she left, no kiss, no promises, just a long look that said, "If you reach out again, I'll answer." She didn't ask for my armor. She just reminded me I had skin underneath it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left my phone at home and took a walk by the lake. No music, no deadlines, just air and breath and self. I sat by the water and wrote in the notebook again. This time, not about Evelyn, not about pain, just about presence. What I wanted to feel, who I wanted to be, what I'd no longer carry forward. I wrote, "Peace is not the absence of people. It's the presence of self, undiminished." I thought about Evelyn less with each passing week, not because I forced her out, but because she no longer fit in the version of life I was building. She had been a chapter, a loud one, a jagged one, but not the whole book, not even close. And Mira, she didn't rush in. She just remained available, kind, curious, present, a reminder that love doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it arrives like a chair in the hallway, waiting. That weekend, I met Asha for dinner. She noticed the shift in me before I could name it. "You're lighter," she said. "Not like you lost something, like you gave it back." I nodded. "I stopped carrying the parts of me that were only built to survive her." Asha raised a glass. "To the return of the real you." "No," I said, smiling. "To the new one." It came in a plain manila envelope, no return address, stamped, folded, clean. Inside, a copy of an official notice from the state licensing board. At the top, "Notice of professional reprimand. Evelyn Grayson. Infraction. Submission of unauthorized legal documentation. Disciplinary action. Suspension of license. 3 months. With review." I stared at it for a long time. Not with satisfaction, not with bitterness. Just stillness. I hadn't followed up on the forged signature report. I'd filed it properly, truthfully, without flair. No press, no spectacle. And I let the process unfold like it was designed to. But it had done its work. 3 months. Enough to pause her momentum. Enough to stain her brand. Enough to remind her that power without integrity is just a house without a foundation. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Asha. Not Mira. Not even my associate. Because the moment wasn't about Evelyn anymore. It was about something bigger. Something quieter. The system worked. Because I didn't break myself trying to force it. Later that week, Mira and I sat on the back porch of my house. It was her second time there. She brought pastries. I made coffee. She asked about the envelope on the counter. I told her what it was. She didn't gasp, didn't cheer. She just said, "Do you feel different?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "Just right. Like something returned to its proper place." She nodded. "And her?" "I don't know," I said. And I don't think I care. Justice isn't revenge. It's restoration, without the need to gloat. Mira smiled at me. You really are free now. I think so. She leaned back. Can I ask you something? Of course. If none of this had happened, if she hadn't cheated, if you never sold the house, would you have stayed? That question felt like someone opened a window in a locked room. I didn't answer right away, then, yes, I said quietly. I would have stayed, because I thought loyalty was love. Mira watched me carefully. And now? Now I know that love without respect is just performance, and I'm done performing. Later that night, I went through an old drawer, found the marriage certificate, folded it neatly, took it outside, burned it in a fire-safe bowl on the deck. Not for vengeance, for closure. The paper curled into ash, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like dead weight. I felt whole. The next morning, I mailed the reprimand envelope back to the board, unopened. Let them keep the copy. Let them carry her consequences. Because I wasn't carrying her anymore. Mira didn't press. That's what I liked about her. She didn't ask how I felt every 5 minutes. Didn't search my face for signs of old wounds reopening. She just showed up in quiet ways, texting me a link to an article she knew I'd like, dropping by the office with coffee and no expectation, laughing when I made dry jokes no one else used to get. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition. One night we sat on my couch, a quiet movie playing, something black and white and moody. Halfway through, I paused it. Can I ask you something? I said. She turned to me. Always. Why haven't you asked me out? She blinked, but didn't look surprised. Because I didn't come back into your life to fill an empty chair, she said. I wanted to make sure there wasn't one before I sat down. That hit harder than I expected, not because it was harsh, because it was true. I thought about the guest room, the last place Evelyn told me I belonged, a placeholder, an afterthought, a spare, and Mira? She wanted no part of that arrangement. She wasn't waiting to be second choice. She was waiting for mutual ground. I looked at her and said, "There's no empty chair. There's a whole new table." She smiled. That's a better starting point. Some people wait for love to fix them. Others wait for healing to make room for love. That night, I didn't kiss her. She didn't stay over. But something between us shifted, the kind of shift you don't feel until the next morning, when the light hits different and the air feels more yours. The next week, I opened up the firm's second office, small, just one room, closer to the city. I let my junior partner lead the first case there, gave her full credit. Because power isn't something you hold tightly. It's something you share when you're not afraid of being replaced. Mira dropped by on opening day with flowers. Not roses, not showy. Simple white tulips in brown paper. I thought your space needed something alive, she said. I placed them on the windowsill. They're perfect. So's this, she said, looking around. You've built something clean, from nothing. I corrected her, smiling. From pain, which is never really nothing, unless you refuse to grow from it. Later that evening, we walked by the lake. No big moment, no sudden declarations, just steps, even, equal. And I thought, this is what love could be, not grand, not loud, but honest. She reached for my hand halfway around the bend, fingers laced with mine like they'd never fit anywhere else, and I let myself feel it. Not as rebound, not as rescue, but as entry, into trust, into possibility, into life. It was a quiet Sunday. The kind Evelyn used to fill with curated brunches, social climbing, and passive-aggressive silence if I wasn't dressed by 9 a.m. Now, I wore a hoodie and made pancakes. No reason, no performance. Mira sat at the counter, legs tucked under her, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that said, "Peace is a process." She bought it from a local shop the day before. Held it up to me at the register and said, "Feels like your autobiography." After breakfast, she helped me clear boxes from the closet I'd never finished unpacking. One of them was filled with notebooks, old ones, half-written, some torn, ideas I'd scribbled during law school, business concepts I abandoned mid-marriage. Even a short story I started back when I thought creativity was allowed to live beside ambition. She flipped through one. "You wrote this?" I nodded, sheepish. "You used to imagine things?" "I still do," I said. "I just forgot that imagining isn't unprofessional." She looked at me like I was something valuable I hadn't noticed yet. "You could write again." I shook my head. "I'm a lawyer." She didn't flinch. "So? So lawyers don't—" She cut me off. "Lawyers don't what? Feel? Dream?" I didn't answer. She placed the notebook in my hand. "Surviving isn't the same as living, and you're allowed to be more than the job that saved you." That night I wrote a paragraph. Just one. About a man who lost everything but kept his voice. Then another, then a page, and I realized I hadn't stopped writing because I didn't have time. I stopped because Evelyn didn't leave room for my voice unless it made her sound better. I didn't lose my voice in marriage. I lowered it, so she wouldn't call it inconvenient. The next day, I brought a notebook to the office. My staff noticed the change. Not big, but visible. I was more relaxed, more curious, more me. And I started asking them questions I hadn't asked before. What do you love about this job? What do you want to do here long term? What makes you feel useful, not just used? One of my interns nearly cried, said no one had ever asked her that. I realized something that day. I had power now, not just over my life, but over the culture I created. And I could build a space where people didn't have to shrink to belong. Later, Mira and I sat on the dock. She leaned against my shoulder, quiet. The sky stretched wide, stars starting to show. "I like this version of you," she said softly. "What version is that?" "The one who's not proving anything, just being everything." I looked out at the lake, still, deep, like the man I was finally becoming, and I thought, this is what she never saw, not because I hid it, but because she only looked for what she could use. Now? Someone was finally seeing me for what I kept, not what I gave away, and I wasn't afraid of being known anymore. Shape I handed in my resignation the first week of April. Not from my firm, from the board seat I'd earned after the divorce. It was honorary. A nod to the way I'd rebuilt quickly, quietly. A seat at a table full of sharp suits and glass smiles. But lately, every time I walked into those meetings, I felt out of place. Not because I didn't belong, because I'd outgrown the need to prove that I did. The chairman called me the next morning. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This position holds weight." "It doesn't hold peace," I replied. "And that's the only weight I carry now." He was silent for a beat, then said, "You've changed, Caleb." "No," I said. "I've returned." Mira was the first person I told in person. She didn't gasp, didn't lecture, just said, "Good." "You think it's smart?" I asked. "I think it's real," she said, "and smart doesn't matter if you're miserable." That night, I drafted a new charter for my firm. Not for investors, not for clients. For us. For the people working beside me. At the top of the page, I wrote, "We exist to practice law with clarity, calm, and conscience. We will not chase noise. We will protect the quiet. We will build space for truth and the people who speak it." I emailed it to my staff the next day. No mandatory meeting, just a note. "This is where we're going. If you want to build this with me, I'm all in. If you want something louder, you'll have my blessing. Either way, thank you for the chapters behind us." Caleb, everyone stayed. Some even cried. Because people don't leave good jobs. They leave places where they feel unseen. And now, everyone felt seen, including me. I stopped chasing rooms that were never built for my voice, and I built one where no one has to whisper. Later that week, I opened the notebook again. This time, I didn't write strategy. I wrote memory, pages of it. Not of Evelyn, of me, who I was before the rules. Before I learned how to dim myself for approval. Before I made myself small for a woman who could only love things she could control. Mira read a few paragraphs one night, closed the notebook gently. "You should publish this." I shook my head. "Why?" "Because there are quiet people out there waiting to hear themselves reflected back." I paused. "Even if it's messy?" "Especially if it is." We sat by the fireplace. No TV, no noise, just the crackling of slow warmth and the silence of undemanding presence. And I realized I had spent years preparing for storms. Now I was learning to live in weather that didn't hurt. I looked at her and asked, "Do you ever worry it's too late to start again?" She tilted her head. "No, but I worry that most people wait too long to believe they're allowed to." That line stayed with me for days. And one morning, I called a small press in the city. Asked if they published personal essays. They said yes. The next month, I sent them 5 pages. No pen name, no drama. Just a story about a man who learned to make peace with stillness. After someone tried to exile him with it, the piece went live on a Thursday. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a simple title on a small publication site. When the Guest Room Becomes a Mirror, by Caleb Warwick. No one outside a quiet audience would have noticed. Until they did. It started with a comment, then a share, then a quote pulled and reposted a dozen times over. She told me to sleep in the guest room. What she didn't know was, I'd already learned how to build a house she couldn't enter. Suddenly, my inbox filled with messages, not from critics, from survivors. People wrote in, dozens at first, then hundreds. Men, women, even teenagers. I didn't know someone else had lived this. Thank you for showing me that quiet doesn't mean weak. You just described my life. I thought I was crazy. This line made me cry. I didn't even know I was still grieving. It wasn't viral, but it was visceral. And when something touches bone, it doesn't need millions. It just needs truth. Mira read every message I let her. She sat with me one evening as I scrolled through the comments. She placed her hand over mine and said, "This is what happens when you speak with nothing to prove. You give people permission to stop performing." I looked at her quiet. She said, "You thought you were rebuilding just for you." I nodded. "You weren't," she said. "You were making a blueprint." I hadn't realized how many people were waiting, not for revenge stories, not for drama, for permission to leave, to rest, to recover, and, most surprisingly, to do it without rage. One email stopped me cold. It came from an address I didn't recognize, but the name? Emerson Rowe, one of the partners at Evelyn's old firm. He wrote, "Caleb, I read your essay. Didn't know you could write like that. Didn't know she could lie like that. Some of us watched it unfold, but we weren't brave enough to call it what it was. You didn't just reclaim your life. You reminded the rest of us that silence can be survival or surrender. You chose survival, and then you chose sound. Well done. E. Rowe." I sat with that email for a long time. Not out of pride, out of grief. For how many people saw the erosion and said nothing. But I wasn't bitter. I just felt clear. Shape. I didn't write to burn bridges. I wrote to light the ones I had already walked across. Mira asked if I'd write more. I told her I didn't know. She said, "The world's full of noise. What it needs is more deliberate voices." I smiled. I can be deliberate. That weekend, we drove upstate. No agenda, just space. Trees taller than our doubts. Wind that didn't ask us to hurry. A lake not yet touched by summer swimmers. We stayed at a cabin with no Wi-Fi. She read. I wrote, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't returning from pain. I was walking into peace. She looked at me one night as we sat under a soft sky. "Do you ever miss her?" I didn't lie. "Sometimes I miss who I thought she was." Mira nodded. "And yourself? The version that loved her?" I took a breath. "I don't miss him. I grieve him." She touched my face. "I like who you became, even if you had to walk through fire to get here." The message came through the firm's main line, a voicemail. The assistant forwarded it to me with a polite note. Didn't sound urgent, but the name might ring a bell. It did. Clara Holt, Evelyn's best friend, the one who always called me dependable, with a smile that meant predictable, the one who sat at our wedding and whispered into Evelyn's ear like she was feeding her scripts, the one who stopped following me online the day we announced the divorce. Her voice on the voicemail was clipped, controlled. "Caleb, this is Clara Holt. I read your essay. I think we should talk. I'm concerned about the direction your narrative is taking. Some things are better left private, don't you agree?" I played it twice, then once more just to make sure I caught the part where she used the word direction, like this was a PR strategy and not my life. I didn't call her back, not right away. I waited. 3 days. Let the discomfort bloom where it belonged, on her side of the silence. Then I texted her, "Clara, we can talk. My office, Thursday, 10 a.m. If you want tea and control, bring your own. Caleb." She showed up in heels too sharp for the sidewalk and a coat that looked more expensive than honest. Didn't wait to be seated. Just sat down like the room owed her something. "You're not hard to find anymore," she said. "I stopped hiding." "I didn't say you were hiding." "No," I replied. "But Evelyn used to." She smiled, tight, calculated. "We were all surprised by your tone in the essay. And yet," I said, "none of you were surprised by hers in the marriage." They were fine with the silence as long as it protected her reputation instead of my reality. She leaned forward. "This could affect her career." I blinked. It already did. She did that. "She's still rebuilding. And I'm still healing." She looked at me like I was speaking another language. "You've always been measured, Caleb. Don't lose that now." I smiled. "I didn't lose it. I just stopped using it to protect people who wouldn't return the favor." She tried again. "She's sorry, you know. She didn't mean for it to unravel like that." I stayed still. "She meant to betray me. She meant to move the house into her name. She meant to forge my signature. She just didn't mean for me to get out intact." Clara's jaw tightened. "You've changed." "Thank you." She stood. "This won't stay quiet." I looked up at her. "I don't need it to be quiet anymore. I just need it to be true." She left without shaking my hand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch from the storm. I watched it pass, because truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand. Later, Mira and I sat in the park, watching the wind carry golden leaves like pages turning themselves. I told her what happened. She didn't respond right away, just touched my arm. "You didn't have to tell me," she said. "I wanted to." "Why?" "Because I don't want secrets. Not anymore. Not the ones I keep to protect people who would have let me drown." She looked at me gently. "And if she tries to fight back?" "I'm not fighting," I said. "I'm just walking forward." The first invitation came from a local college. They were hosting a symposium on personal ethics and law. Someone on the planning committee had read my essay. They reached out with a short, hesitant email. "We know this isn't a typical legal lecture request, but would you consider speaking to our students, not about contracts or clauses, but about integrity when no one's watching?" I stared at the screen for a while, then smiled. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, deliberate, like me. I said yes. The night before the event, I stood in front of the mirror. tie on the dresser, jacket hanging beside the chair. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder how I'd be perceived. I wondered how I could be useful. Mira found me mid-sentence, reading the closing lines of my talk out loud, pacing. She leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, smiling. "You talk to juries for a living and you're nervous about college kids?" I laughed. "This feels different." "It is," she said. "It's honest." The next morning, I walked onto a small stage in a small room filled with strangers, but they didn't feel like strangers. They felt like versions of me. Younger, quieter, still figuring out where their voice ended and someone else's began. I didn't open with law. I opened with the guest room. When my wife told me to sleep in the guest room, she didn't say it with cruelty. She said it with comfort. Because that's what happens when someone gets used to making you small. They start believing your absence is their peace. There was a stillness in the room, not the kind born from boredom, the kind born from recognition. I told them about forging, about silence, about shrinking to fit someone else's vision of professional. And then I told them about building a life that fit without folding, about choosing peace over revenge, about presence over performance. They asked questions after, not about Evelyn, about courage and recovery, and what success actually looks like when your name's not attached to someone else's spotlight. One student, couldn't have been older than 20, came up afterward. She said, "I thought strength meant staying. Now I see it might mean leaving, and still loving yourself when no one claps." I nodded. Exactly. Strength isn't staying in the fire. It's knowing you're allowed to walk out and build warmth elsewhere. That night, Mira and I sat on the kitchen floor. Pizza on paper plates. Laughter in the walls. She looked at me like I'd just returned from battle. "How did it feel?" "Right," I said. Like something clicked. "You think you'll keep doing it?" I leaned back. "If there's someone out there still in the guest room, yeah, I think I will." Later, I opened a new notebook. First page. Clean. At the top, I wrote, "The House Beyond the Guest Room, Essays on Peace, Power, and Self-Return." Not for fame, not for attention, just for the ones still crawling out of rooms they never belonged in. I saw her at the bookstore, not Evelyn, Talia. We had gone on 3 dates years before Evelyn. Bright eyes, quick wit. She was the kind of woman who asked real questions and gave uncomfortable truths. Back then, I wasn't ready for either. She was standing in the non-fiction aisle reading the back of a book I'd already reviewed for my firm's newsletter. I almost walked past. Then she looked up. "Caleb?" I smiled. "Talia?" She blinked like she was unsure I was real. Then, "Well, you're still taller than I remember. And you're still better at first words than I am." We got coffee. 2 blocks down. Small table. Familiar energy. It wasn't charged, it wasn't awkward, just real. "Found your essay," she said, stirring her drink. "Didn't realize it was you until I hit that guest room line." I laughed. "That line's been doing some damage." "Or healing," she said, "depending on who's reading it." We caught up. She was working with a nonprofit now, housing security and domestic advocacy. "Turns out," she said, "the rooms people are told to stay in aren't always physical." I nodded slowly. "No, they're not." She leaned forward, soft but direct. "Can I ask something maybe I shouldn't?" "Go ahead." "Did you know back then, with her, that it wouldn't be right?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said, "but I knew it wouldn't be whole. I just thought wholeness was too much to ask for." Talia exhaled. "So you settled?" I nodded. I think she did too. We didn't choose each other for love. We chose each other because we didn't think better was available. Talia looked at me kindly. No judgment, just clarity. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we kept dating?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I was a different man then." and I didn't want to raise someone else's emotional children. We both laughed. Harder than expected. There was no spark, no regret. Just a soft understanding that some people walk through your life early, to show you the kind of love you'll one day be ready to return. Before she left, she handed me a business card. "Call me if you ever want to speak at a shelter," she said. "They listen better when the man in the room doesn't sound like a threat." I took the card. Deal. That night, I told Mira about Talia, not because I owed her an explanation, because I wanted to share truth before it got lost. She didn't flinch, just nodded and said, "She helped shape the version of you I get to love now. I don't mind sharing a thank you." Later, I sat on the porch alone, notebook open, writing lines I hadn't been brave enough to write before. We only call it settling after we learn to stand. Before that, we just call it staying. I didn't miss Evelyn. I didn't miss what almost happened with Talia. I didn't long for any version of my past anymore. What I felt now was presence, and the kind of peace that doesn't need to be proven, just practiced. Mira brought up the house. We were sitting on the porch, the sun sliding low over the edge of the trees, the air filled with the slow hum of a world not in a rush. She looked around, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and said softly, "This place, it doesn't feel like a house someone escaped from. It feels like a house someone came home to." I didn't answer right away, not because I disagreed, but because I hadn't thought of it like that. Not yet. I'd poured so much of myself into reclaiming this space, repainting walls, replacing furniture, donating every trace of Evelyn's curated taste, and curating nothing in return except honesty. And maybe that was enough. Maybe the house didn't need a new aesthetic. Maybe it just needed air. Mira set her cup down gently. "Have you ever thought about selling it?" That surprised me. "You think I should?" "I didn't say that." "Then why ask?" She turned to face me. "Because maybe you stayed to prove you weren't broken. Maybe now you stay because you're not afraid. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to live somewhere that doesn't carry any weight at all." That landed deep, because she wasn't wrong. The house had become a monument to survival, a quiet fortress, a reminder that I hadn't been erased. But it also held echoes, not loud ones, but present ones. And peace shouldn't echo. You can forgive a house for what it held, but that doesn't mean you owe it the rest of your life. "I don't want to run from this place," I said. "I know," Mira said, "but maybe you're finally free to walk toward something instead." We didn't talk about it again for a few days. I carried the thought, not with urgency, but with care. I walked room to room, not looking for ghosts, but for space. And I realized something. I wasn't afraid of this house anymore, which meant I didn't need it to protect me. That weekend, we drove to a quiet open-lot development near the edge of town. New homes, simple builds, big windows, light. A young couple was getting a tour when we arrived. They looked nervous, hopeful. I remembered that feeling. Only I didn't want a house to anchor a fantasy. I wanted a house that reflected who I was now. The realtor walked us through a model. It wasn't huge, wasn't flashy, but it felt clean, untouched by history, full of possibility, not performance. Mira ran her fingers over the kitchen island and said, "You wouldn't be running from anything. You'd just be choosing where your story goes next." I looked at her. This woman who never once asked me to be louder, tougher, faster, less, who let me rebuild without hovering, who waited not for my apology, but for my arrival. Later that night, we sat on the couch in the living room, the same one where Evelyn once told me she felt like she was carrying dead weight. And I said something I hadn't dared to ask myself in over a year. Do you want to build something with me? Not as a rebound, not to fix me, but because I'm whole now, and I want to share that. Mira didn't blink, she just said, "Yes," And it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't movie scripted. It was exactly right. We didn't talk about rings or leases or timelines, just the idea. That love can begin in the ruins, but it thrives in the rebuilding. That night, I walked into the guest room one last time, the one she banished me to, the room I thought would break me. I stood in the doorway, took a breath, and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." Then I turned out the light and closed the door for good. I found the old suit in the back of the closet, the charcoal one with the sharp lapels and narrow shoulders. It still had Evelyn's dry cleaning tag on it, marked urgent in red. I hadn't worn it since the last gala we attended together. The night she introduced me to someone as the calm one, like I was an accessory she brought to balance her brightness. I slipped it on, not out of longing, out of curiosity. Would it still fit? It did, but I didn't recognize the man in the mirror anymore. The reflection looked the same on the outside, pressed, polished, controlled, but I could see it now, the tightness around the collar. The stillness in the eyes that wasn't peace, but suppression. That version of me, he was never weak. He was loyal to a fault, and he mistook being manageable for being loved. I stared at him for a long time, not with judgment, with compassion. Because that man got me through things I didn't think I could survive. He played the role. He bore the silence. He watched his wife shrink him and still said thank you when she let him stay. I didn't hate who I was. I just finally knew I didn't have to stay him. I took the jacket off, folded it neatly, placed it in the donation pile, and whispered, "You got me here, but I'll take it from here." Mira came by an hour later. She found me barefoot in the living room, playing a record I hadn't listened to since law school. She smiled. "You look light." I let go of someone today. "Oh?" The man who thought love meant being quiet enough to keep. She walked over, wrapped her arms around me, rested her head against my chest. I liked the man who learned better. That night we laid on the floor under a ceiling of fairy lights. We didn't say much, just breathed the same air. And I realized, healing doesn't always end in a grand moment. Sometimes it ends in a whisper. You don't have to go back there. I opened my notebook. Wrote a final paragraph in a chapter I hadn't been able to close. It read, "To the man who stayed silent to keep the peace, I forgive you. You were never broken. You were just trying to be loved in a language she never learned to speak. But I've learned now, and I speak it to myself every day." The real estate agent was someone I hadn't seen in years. Arman Patel. He used to play pickup basketball with me on Sundays, back when Evelyn and I still called each other by our first names instead of legal titles. He sold us the house. When he walked in for the appraisal appointment, he blinked, stunned. "Caleb?" I smiled. "It's been a while." He shook my hand like he was making sure I was real. "I heard about the divorce. Wasn't sure if you stayed here." "I did. For a while." He glanced around the house. "I remember this place looked like a magazine spread when you bought it. It looked like her version of permanence." He nodded slowly. "And now?" I shrugged. "Now it looks like closure." We walked room to room. He took notes, asked the usual questions. When we got to the guest room, he paused in the doorway. "This room used to be a library, right?" "It did," I said. Then it became a lesson. He didn't ask for more. Didn't need to. He looked at the worn rug, the clean walls, the sunlight leaking through blinds that didn't quite close all the way. And he said softly, "Sometimes a room teaches you more than a person ever did." I stayed in a room meant for guests, because I forgot I was allowed to leave houses that didn't love me. We walked out to the porch. He checked his tablet, gave me an estimate. It was higher than I expected. "Market's changed," he said. "You're sitting on equity now." I sipped my coffee. "I'm sitting on a decision." He looked up. "Second thoughts?" "No, just full ones." He gave me a look I knew well. The kind men give when they want to say something personal but aren't sure if they have permission. Then he asked, "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I remember when you and Evelyn first toured this place. She walked ahead, called all the rooms. You followed behind, real quiet. I thought, maybe you were just letting her lead." I waited. "But I saw your face when she said, 'You'll be fine working from the guest room.' You flinched. Just once." I blinked. "You noticed?" "Of course. I sell people their beginning stories every day. I can always tell who's just hoping the ending won't hurt." He handed me the paperwork. "You don't have to rush, but if you're ready, this house can be someone else's fresh start. Doesn't have to be your museum." I nodded. "I think I've already moved out emotionally. Now I'm just catching the deed up." That night, I stood in the kitchen. No lights, just moon through glass. I walked to the fridge, took down the last magnet that Evelyn bought on one of her gallery trips. "In this house, we do success." I dropped it into the trash and whispered, "In my house, we do peace." I sent out 4 texts. That was the whole guest list. Not a grand send-off, not a social media moment. Just honest people who stood still when my world split. Asha, Tariq, my associate, Mira, of course, and Arman, who sold me this house twice, once as a dream, once as a door. I didn't say, "Goodbye, house," on the invitation. I said, "One last night in the space that taught me stillness. Come eat, breathe, and let the walls know we made it through." They all showed. No one came dressed up. No wine bottles with foil. No forced laughter. Just shoes off at the door and quiet, comfortable greetings. We ordered Indian food. Laid everything out on the kitchen island, Mira once said, smelled like freedom. Tariq brought a case of sparkling water. He raised his glass first. "To peace," he said. "To truth," said Asha. "To no more guest rooms," Mira added with a half smile. I laughed. Then lifted my glass and said, "To houses that teach us but don't get to keep us." We ate on the floor, no chairs. Just pillows and plates and candlelight flickering like the house was breathing its last quiet sigh. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just presence. After dinner, I walked them room to room. I didn't narrate, I didn't over-explain, I just showed them. The bookshelf in the living room, once filled with Evelyn's status-signaling hardbacks, now stacked with real voices. The hallway mirror where I used to check if I looked presentable enough to be ignored. The master bedroom, where silence once sat heavier than sleep. And yes, the guest room. When we reached it, no one said anything for a long time. The light was soft. The window was cracked open. It didn't feel haunted, just empty. Some rooms are made for visitors. I stayed in one because I forgot I was allowed to be the host of my own life. Mira stepped in and ran her fingers across the frame. "I used to think this room was your shame," she said. "It was," I admitted, "until it became my mirror." She looked at me gently. "And now?" "Now it's just a room. No ghosts, no history. Just walls." We gathered our things. No one rushed to leave, but no one lingered out of guilt either. Asha hugged me at the door. "You're lighter," she said. "I'm not carrying anyone else's silence anymore." She smiled. "Then you'll be fine in any house." When it was just Mira and me, we stood in the empty hallway. I turned off each light slowly. Not for drama, for finality. When we reached the front door, I paused. One last look at the place that raised the version of me I didn't keep. I whispered, "Thank you for sheltering me while I found my name again," and walked out. That night, I slept in a temporary apartment with a mattress on the floor and nothing on the walls. And still, it felt more like home than the house ever had. Because home isn't space. It's safety you don't have to earn. It was a coincidence. Or maybe fate, dressed like a Thursday afternoon. I was signing the final paperwork on the house sale. A neutral office, 2 agents, 1 quiet closing clerk, and then The door opened behind me, and she walked in. Evelyn. Her hair was shorter, her heels lower. No blazer, just a beige sweater that looked a size too big, like she'd shrunk but hadn't admitted it. She froze when she saw me. So did I. But only for a second. Because I didn't feel fear. I felt distance, the kind that time earns, not grief. "Caleb," she said. It was the first time I'd heard her say my name in 2 years without edge. "Evelyn," I said evenly. She glanced at the desk, at the title folder. "You're selling it." "I am." She looked down, then away. "I didn't think you'd let it go." I smiled. Small, real. That was the problem, wasn't it? You never realized I could choose things too. She walked toward the window, arms crossed. "I drove by last week. Looked empty." "It's been full," I said. "Of peace. Of people who knew how to stay without control." She nodded. Slow. Almost sad. "You changed." "No," I said. "I returned. You left me in the guest room thinking I'd wither. But I watered myself. And now the house can't hold me." She didn't argue, didn't defend, just looked tired, like a person finally realizing the silence they crafted for someone else eventually becomes their own. She said quietly, "I thought I was building something smart, something that would hold." "You were," I said, "but only if I stayed small." She turned to face me, and for the first time in years, her voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd ever leave." I stood, collected my folder, buttoned my jacket. "I didn't either." Pause. "But I did, and I didn't just leave the house." She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. I didn't wait. "Take care, Evelyn." Then I walked past her, out of the room, out of the house, the marriage, the silence. The version of myself who ever needed her approval to feel real. I didn't look back, because closure isn't hearing "I'm sorry." It's not needing it anymore. That night, I sat beside Mira in our new place. Smaller, brighter, no ghosts. She handed me a pen and said, "Ready to write the ending?" I shook my head. "No. Ready to start the sequel." I opened a fresh page. Wrote the first line. The man who was asked to sleep in the guest room didn't just find the door out. He found the world outside and learned to build his own house. From truth, not control. The new house smelled like paint and pine. Mira opened every window the first morning we moved in. "Let it breathe," she said, spinning slowly in the center of the living room. "Let it know we're not here to trap anything." I smiled, took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I believed. There was no trap left in me. We didn't rush to furnish it. Each room became what it wanted to be, not what was expected. The smallest bedroom became a music room, even though neither of us played anything, yet. The kitchen held plants, not performance. The walls held nothing for weeks, and still it felt like home. Because peace doesn't need decor. It needs permission. We sat on the back deck that evening, sun curling down over the hills, a bottle of wine unopened between us, blankets, quiet, unfolded futures. "I still think about the guest room," I said suddenly. Mira didn't flinch. "Why?" "Not out of pain, out of respect. It tried to shrink me, but it showed me exactly where I ended, and where I had to begin." She nodded slowly. "It was a threshold. Sometimes the room meant to hold you down becomes the one that teaches you to stand." My phone buzzed on the railing. An email from the publisher. The essay collection, The House Beyond the Guest Room, was being approved for print. They wanted to include my original marriage certificate, redacted as a visual artifact. I said yes, not to humiliate, not to prove anything, but to show. Some documents bind you. Others set you free, when you choose to write beyond them. We toasted with tea instead of champagne. Mira smiled over the rim of her cup and said, "You're really doing it." Doing what? Living. Not fixing. Not defending. Just living. I opened the notebook one last time that night. Wrote this. She called me dead weight, so I let her carry the consequences. But I carried myself, out of rooms, out of silence, out of smallness, into a life I built on stillness, not fear. I closed the book, not with finality, with beginning. Because endings aren't meant to be doors locked behind us, they're thresholds, and I finally crossed mine.